Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are untangling a topic that honestly affects every single one of us, whether we realize it or not. We're talking about the deep, often completely hidden psychology of wealth. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and deeply personal review written by a writer named Salima. So she recently sat down to read Sarah Akwisombe's book, The Money is Coming, and she decided to actually document her reactions in real time. Salima went into this expecting a pretty standard practical financial guide, but what she got was, well, something entirely different. And as we go through this explainer today, I really want you to ask yourself how much of what we're talking about reflects your own life. Because Salima's big revelation really boiled down to this. She opened the book expecting a step-by-step manual on manifesting wealth, practical financial lessons, maybe some solid budgeting tips. But instead, she was immediately confronted with this massive psychological mirror reflecting her absolute deepest anxieties. She realized super quickly that our bank accounts and our business ideas are just so tightly tangled up in our emotions, our fears, and our personal history. It turns out, when we're talking about money, we are literally rarely just talking about the numbers on a screen.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the perfection loop, the external symptom.
So let's start by looking right at the surface level, the external symptom of our financial anxieties. It's something so many of us do every single day, and we usually don't even realize how much it's stalling our own progress. Just look at the stark contrast between these two realities. On one hand, you have an idea that's actually implemented out in the real world. On the other hand, you have an idea that's being endlessly tweaked and perfected for decades. Salima recognized this trap immediately, and honestly, who hasn't? How many times have you kept a supposedly brilliant business idea totally trapped in your phone's notes app for 2 years just because the branding isn't quite right yet? Or maybe you pushed back a launch because the timing wasn't utterly perfect. We love to tell ourselves we're just being diligent, but there is a massive difference between doing the work and hiding behind it.
And here is the real punchline from Salima's reflections. The perfection loop is a very elegant form of self-sabotage. Just really think about that for a second. Waiting to become the absolutely perfect version of yourself before you start a project or, say, ask for a raise, it isn't actually about having high standards. It's a protective shield. It lets you feel like you're working really hard while completely, 100% avoiding the real risk of actually being seen, judged, or potentially failing out loud. It is a brilliant, insidious way to keep yourself exactly where you are.
Which brings us to Section 2, Inherited Operating Systems, the internal root.
Let's get down to the root cause here. If perfectionism is just the symptom, where's all this fear actually coming from? Well, this brings us to a huge realization. Our financial anxieties are not random, not at all. They are deeply programmed into us, often starting back when we were literally just kids. And notice the crucial word here, unconscious. We all have this internal operating system when it comes to money. You didn't consciously choose these beliefs. You didn't sit down at 7 years old and decide how you were going to feel about wealth. This programming was just handed to you. You absorbed it through childhood observations, watching your parents' habits, taking in your culture, and consuming media. It was essentially installing in the background while you were just busy trying to grow up.
To really illustrate this, Salima shares this incredibly poignant childhood anecdote. She observed two very, very different roles in her household growing up. Her father was the breadwinner, right? So for him, money was his domain, it was his responsibility, and it was a symbol of authority. But when her dad fell ill, the whole dynamic shifted. She vividly remembers this lingering image of her mom sitting in the living room at night, anxiously counting notes in the dark right before market day, whispering about how expensive absolutely everything had become. Salima thought she was just a kid watching, but that image programmed her to associate money directly with anxiety and survival rather than abundance. She learned to hold on tight, completely terrified to spend a dime.
And hey, if our parents laid the foundation, the media definitely built the house. Think about the movies we all watched growing up. They constantly reinforce this fear. We were essentially taught that rich men always neglect their families, and wealthy women are fundamentally unhappy until they give it all up for true love. The overarching message was always that money corrupts. Because of this, Salima realized she had started to perform this not caring attitude about wealth just as a survival mechanism. Because if caring about money makes you a bad, corrupted person, well, pretending you don't care at all is really the only safe option.
So what happens next? Section 3, the cage of judgment, the outward projection.
This leads us right into the next phase, because here is the completely fascinating thing about internal programming. It doesn't actually stay internal for long. Eventually, it forces us to project our own deeply buried insecurities outward onto everybody else. We basically build a cage of judgment. Salima offers a pretty harsh but totally necessary wake-up call here. She talks about the intense dissonance of publicly dismissing the very things we privately want. For example, in the book, Sarah Akwisombe talks about how she used to totally scoff at women carrying expensive Chanel bags, calling it ridiculous, when in reality, she desperately wanted one herself. Salima caught herself doing the exact same thing. She found herself silently judging a YouTuber who was celebrating a birthday by hiring a private chef in New York, thinking, oh, with everything happening in the world, is this really what you focus on?
But then, Salima had this stunning realization. She opened up her own ideal life journal and saw that hire a private chef for a dinner party was literally written right there on her own list of goals. And this just brilliantly illustrates the core truth of this whole explainer. We do not shame things we are genuinely indifferent to. We only shame what we secretly want, but just haven't given ourselves the permission to actually have. The judgment is literally just jealousy wearing a mask of moral superiority.
So, I want to ask you a pivotal question right now. It's the exact same question a coach asked the author of the book. Do you know any wealthy person doing good in the world? Take a second to really truly think about that. This question is perfectly designed to shatter that contradictory mindset we all walk around with. You cannot simultaneously desire wealth and abundance for yourself while fundamentally believing that all wealthy people are inherently greedy or bad. The universe, or honestly just your own basic psychology, simply will not allow you to become something you actively despise.
Let's look at a really powerful, real-world example of this judgment in action from the source material. It recounts the immediate aftermath of the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. Remember that? Where 500 million euros were raised almost overnight for its restoration? Remember the public reaction? People felt this hot, righteous anger. The outrage was everywhere. People were saying, how can all this money be given to a building when there is so much human suffering in the world? Now, putting opinions aside, it's a profound example of how quickly we feel totally entitled to dictate how others should spend their money based entirely on our own moral compass.
But here is the real vulnerability in Salima's reflection. When her father originally got sick, she intensely judged the wealthy people around her for going on vacations instead of, say, funding her studies. She felt they actually owed her help. But years later, when she finally gained her own financial comfort, that exact same dynamic mutated into intense guilt. Suddenly, she was the one with the money, and she felt totally paralyzed to spend it freely whenever someone else asked her for help. The contradiction doesn't just vanish when you get wealthy, folks. The anxiety just changes shape.
All right, let's bring it home. Section 4. Freeing others, freeing yourself. The liberation.
So, how do we actually break this cycle? It is time to talk about an uncomfortable but incredibly liberating truth about financial boundaries. Are you ready for this? Because here's a list of things that are absolutely, unequivocally none of your business. Renovating a cathedral? None of your business. Buying a luxury bag? None of your business. Hiring a private chef? Not your business. Choosing which cause to fund? Yep, also none of your business. The absolutely crucial point here is that wealthy people, just like anyone else, have the right to spend their money on whatever is meaningful to them. Look, you wouldn't want a total stranger auditing your grocery bill and telling you to donate your daily coffee money, right? So we simply cannot demand that same right over others.
Salima's realization boils down to this really profound truth, and she puts it so well. The belief that we must dictate other people's moral obligations regarding their wealth isn't actually a personality trait, it's inherited programming. Clinging to the idea that you somehow get to decide how others should act only keeps you resentful, riddled with guilt, and completely stuck in unhelpful, self-sabotaging loops.
So the ultimate takeaway today is pretty clear. Let go of managing other people's money in your head. When you stop policing how strangers spend their wealth, you drop this immense, completely exhausting burden. And by letting go of this external judgment, you finally create the mental space and the energy you need to actually look inward. You need that space to build your own healthy, totally guilt-free relationship with abundance.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to just kind of let linger. Can you free them so you can free yourself? I really encourage you to take a hard look into your own money mirror today. Notice where you are holding on to judgment and ask yourself what secretly buried desires that judgment just might be hiding. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I will see you next time.